You hear the word cybersecurity all the time, but do you really know what it means? Well, we just happen to be covering that very topic today on our Tech Tip Live. I'm Ron Trotto, TC Computer Consulting, and here we go. So, cybersecurity. Well, at the core, I bet you know what it is. Because at the core, it's a very simple concept, and that is protecting systems that are connected to the internet. Boom, easy peasy. We're done, right? Oh, not so fast. Just like anything else, you take a microscopic look underneath that layer and you find out that there's a lot of complexity there, especially with cybersecurity. Cybersecurity is probably one of the most foremost pieces that has growth in intellectual property development and spend in the entirety of IT. And that is partially because of what it is, but partially because, well, cybersecurity is really like a bucket for a bunch of other disciplines. It's a specific application of those disciplines, but it's a bucket of disciplines. So let's discuss at a very high level a few of those core disciplines. What's interesting about this is that a lot of these disciplines have been around since before the internet was even established. And there are disciplines that have been created specifically because the internet was established. So we have quite a dichotomy in this bucket of cybersecurity. Why is the term cybersecurity used? Well, it's a very easy way to group all of these various things into, well, protecting a system that's online. So anytime that a system's attacked, they just say it's a cyber attack. Cyber system, cybersecurity, cyber attack. It just generalizes it and simplifies it for most. So let's talk real quickly about some of these various layers. So at the core, we have the networking, right? Networking connects all of our stuff together. There's a lot of things that can be done in there to thwart cyber attacks. But it is the connective tissue that holds it all together. Now you can go from the mild to the extreme. You can go from the small business that really doesn't have a lot of data or is well secluded or is physically secure to a larger like campus where you don't want people just plugging into jacks all over the place to get to your core systems, or enterprise where you can plug in to only one jack because that's where your computer is allowed, and if you ever change out a computer you have to put in a ticket to allow it to get onto the network. So we have all various levels of complexity in that one discipline alone, but it's a pretty big one for small business. Let's flip up a couple and go to application security. And I like to use QuickBooks as my example here. Would you like your employee to just open up QuickBooks and not have to log in and just get right to the numbers? Probably not, right? So QuickBooks has put in a password thing into their application, but there's other ways to get that data. And in the past, for instance, QuickBooks didn't require that you had passwords on backups, for instance. So that's a really good one. Or it had a default backup stream, and you were able to actually pull that backup and get data from there if you were savvy on how to do that. So they corrected their application layer to protect the information that was in there. And I believe now they do some crazy encryption or something, but, and it's required. So kudos to them for tightening that up. And it's just a really good example of how applications work in the security realm, especially the cybersecurity realm, especially if you have an application that is a web application. A lot of security has to go around that application itself to make sure that the data is secure. Information security, well, we hear about this one every once in a while. And for the small businesses, it's largely not something that they talk about, that they knowingly talk about. But as a service provider, we are very aware of this security layer, and we typically just ask questions and deal with it behind the scenes because it's not so much in your face like an application or the networking side. Then we have disaster recovery and business continuity. And you may ask, like, what is that doing in cybersecurity? Why does that make a difference? Well, we can ask many of the municipalities out there what difference that makes. You can very clearly see those that are good at their business continuity plan and those that are not. Those that are good at it are down for a few days, up to a week, and they're back up in business, and they didn't pay any ransom whatsoever. They just restored their systems because they had a plan on how to do so. Some of these other municipalities are not so lucky. Either they didn't test their plan, or their plan just never existed, or they developed the plan after the fact and made really misinformed decisions and just shooting from the hip. And it's not a good place to be. It's not really planning, it's just reaction. So don't be reactive. Make sure that you have that business continuity in place. There's really only a handful of scenarios that you need to prepare for and test against. And as long as you've done those handful, all the millions of scenarios that can come your way can pretty much be handled by those. Operational security, OPSEC. This one's important. It's important to have procedures in place for your employees to understand that it's not okay to use their own personal web email. That's not looked upon by the systems. There's no gateway that it goes through, so they could just open up a virus right from that link, and you're relying on just a single piece of the equation to eliminate that threat. And they're not so good at eliminating that threat these days because those threats have become insanely complex. So it's not a matter of having bad antivirus. As long as that's another discussion for another day. As long as you're using next generation, you're doing well. But it's more important to have these procedures in place. It's more important to make sure that there's a procedure for resetting a employee's password, remotely, so that that that's actually that employee. Don't rely on text messages; they can be faked very simply. That's kind of the underlying theme. But as long as you have procedures in place, it's going to prevent many of these things from happening. If you make things complicated for the bad guys, they're going to move on to the next piece. Just keep that in mind. If you have procedures in place, it's going to make it complicated. They're just going to move on to the next target. So, and with that being said, one of the biggest pieces of this equation, biggest piece of the cybersecurity puzzle, especially for the small business, as far as I'm concerned, is continuous education of your end users. End users are end users are end users. They're going to be end users forever and ever. And there's only so much stuff that we can do or even I can do as a provider, even if you have an exorbitant budget. As we get more and more protection in place, the efficiency of the worker becomes less and less because we have to lock more and more down. There's other ways around it, but even money can't buy you out of many of those situations. So at the end of the day, it's really having a well-trained workforce there. And what they're going to do for you is, there's such a huge attack surface for the bad guys to use with an end user. A well-trained end user can limit that attack surface so small that, again, you're going to make it complicated for them and they're just going to move on. So keep up that end user education. It is so important, especially right now. It's probably the most important thing that you can do. So I hope that was helpful. I hope you saw a little more depth of what cybersecurity is. And if it did help, please like and share. And we're going to see you on the next live tech tip. Good night.